You are a junior doctor and you overhear one of your senior doctors using a patient's full name in a hospital canteen. What do you do?
Okay, so using a patient's full name in such a public area is a breach of patient's confidentiality. I think it's really important that the doctor is notified of this because it's putting patient safety at risk and it's not respecting the patient, which is something as doctors we always should do. So I think what I would do is I would approach my senior colleague and, I'd talk to them in a very non-confrontational way and say, do you realize that you were using a patient's full name in a public place, and remind them that, this is a breach of confidentiality and it's really putting patient safety at risk. And I'd hope that they would cooperate with this and would really understand and agree that this is putting patient safety at risk, and that then they would report this and ensure that all of, the protocols are followed to ensure that this doesn't happen again, just to remind him that it's really important that the patient's private data is not shared. And then if he was not to be very cooperative with this, it would then be when I would escalate it to a senior member, because it's really important that things like these don't happen.
Currently, doctors' competence is tested via annual appraisals and revalidation every 5 years. What is your understanding of appraisals and revalidation?
Okay, so appraisals and revalidation I think are really important in maintaining the highest standard of care for patients and making sure that, we're really protecting our patients and that we're continually developing our medical practice. So from what I know, I think reappraisals are kind of conducted in the internal hospital environment and they happen every year. And I think that's ensuring that the hospital recognise and understand what job that doctor is working, kind of all of the personal development plans are set in place to ensure that they are meeting the best standards of practice and that they are up to date on the new guidelines, the new teachings and the new protocols to ensure the best patient safety. I think it's also recognising kind of if serious incidents have happened or if mistakes have happened, that they have been solved, and that an action plan to ensure that this doesn't happen again for this particular doctor is maintained. So I think that's what appraisals are. And then kind of the revalidating that I think you said happens every 5 years is kind of what is needed for the GMC and for the doctor's license as kind of like a time point of refresh and renewal. I think that's taking into consideration the appraisals that have happened each year, as well as ensuring that kind of patient feedback and colleague feedback is taken in. So kind of to see what the key areas need to be worked on for that particular doctor for them to continue. So overall, I think these appraisals and revalidation is really important to maintain the highest standard of care.
Time management is a very important skill for medical students. Can you rank these tasks in order of priority as a medical student and explain your reasoning? 1. Student finance application. 2. An essay due for tomorrow. 3. Meeting with a tutor. 4. Gym. And 5. A MedSoc career talk.
Okay, so I think task prioritization is really important as a medical student. There's so many things going on and it's quite an intense degree, that to ensure that you are becoming as productive and being as efficient and effective as possible, it's really important that your time management and your prioritization is really important. So for me, I think the important thing to consider is the urgency of each one. So for me, the meeting with the tutor would be the most important thing that I would prioritize, because that is taking somebody else's time, and I think it's really important because those sorts of meetings don't happen very often, and it's important to respect the tutor and their time that they're giving up for you. So I'd like to be best prepared for that. I think then for my student finance application is really important, because for me to continue at medical school, I need my student finance. So I would hope that I'd already have submitted my student finance not right up until the application deadline, and that, you know, I have the time and it's not so urgent that it needs to take priority over the meeting with the tutors. So I'd put my time aside to do that. And then again, kind of similar for the essay, of having an essay that's due the next day. I would hope that I'd be prepared and organised already and have it worked into my work schedule, because that's a really big priority of mine. I like to ensure that I'm not leaving things until the last minute, and that you know, I have my time organised a lot earlier than needs to be. So I think then it would be, you know, doing all of the last little minute change of details and just proofreading my essay to ensure that it's submitted and formatted and ready for the deadline the next day. And then I think the next two are really kind of slightly separate and different from the work, but still really important. You know, for me, I am the sort of person that can get quite stressed out, and exercise is a way that I really like to release. And so for me, I think the gym would take priority, because, you know, particularly it sounds like I've got a pretty stressful time coming up with a tutor meeting, with essays and with student finance, that actually I think the gym might be quite beneficial to me for, you know, burning off that stress and, you know, kind of detaching myself and ready for a reset, so I'm calm and ready for all of the things that are coming up ahead. And then I think the MedSoc career talk would then come last, although it's really important and I really would like to engage with the medical society. I think careers talks, they can happen quite often. There are things such as like online events. There's so many free resources online, whether that's on YouTube, whether that's on blogs, or I think I can also get information. And also, like, I think if I was to email the MedSoc, they'd be able to hand over the slides to me, and so that I could then look over them in my own time. So I think task prioritization is just all about what is urgent to you personally in that moment of time, and I think from there on the prioritization should work.
It is 8 a.m. and you are beginning a New Year's Day shift. A fellow FY1 colleague has called in sick for the same shift, stating that she has food poisoning. The following day, you learn that your absent colleague has posted pictures on a social networking site from a New Year's Eve party that she attended the night before her shift. Rank the following actions from most to least appropriate and explain your answer. A. Make other colleagues on the rota aware of the photos from the party. B. Suggest to your FY1 colleagues that she removes the photos from the social networking site. C. Seek advice from another FY1 colleague. D. Ask your colleague for an explanation of why she called in sick the day after a party. E. Alert a senior colleague to the photos on the social networking site.
Okay. So I think what I would first do is D. I would ask my colleague for an explanation of why she called in sick, because I think it's really important to not always presume malice in the act. You know, that colleague could have become ill at the party or got food poisoning from being at the party. So I think it's really important to first of all understand like the context of the situation. With the colleague herself, because I think that's the only person that you're going to be able to get the full information from. I think it's important to keep it between you two at the beginning and not involve other people, because then that can, you know, undermine the confidence in doctors. And, you know, say if there are patients around, again, if there's kind of like that gossiping going around, it's breaking the doctor-patient relationship. So I think it's really important for it to stay between you two at the beginning. I then think my next priority would be B, to kind of tell them that it's really important that they maybe take these posts down. You know, social media is, you know, these pictures can go anywhere into the public, and you don't know who's going to get hold of them and what sort of an image this is implying, again, to, you know, patients and other colleagues in terms of trust and respect. I think that's really important to be maintained, is this whole idea of trust, respect and dignity for all colleagues and all patients around. And then so I think next would be C, which is seek advice from other colleagues. I think, you know, it's really important that we're transparent, and if we do need advice and support, then there are other people that we should be happy to go and talk to. So I personally think that I would handle it myself, and that maybe it's only if the situation wasn't playing out in the way that I was expecting it to be that I would then go and ask for advice. And then I think for me, what I probably wouldn't do is I think that's probably, in terms of order, that would be the next one that I would do, which is alert a senior colleague. I don't necessarily think there's any malice in it that requires escalation to that level of a senior colleague. Again, like I spoke about before, that would ruin kind of like the trust and that relationship breakdown. I think teamwork is a really important skill in medicine, that working within, you know, like this multidisciplinary team and things like that everyone has respect and trust for each other. And, you know, kind of like that one event, you're not necessarily sure on the motivations of the absence necessarily, and you don't have the facts to necessarily, you know, straight away escalate it. And then definitely the last thing that I do not think is appropriate to do so at all is make other colleagues on the rota aware of the photos from the party. I think that would only be for selfish reasons, to maybe, you know, embarrass that colleague, or, you know, to kind of have people talking about it. And again, I don't think that's right. I think there are a lot more important other things that we should be focusing on a ward, and that is patient care and patient safety. And those are always the things that I think must be maintained the best. So having this kind of gossip network going is not productive for the efficiency and the effectiveness of care.
Andrew is on his hospital placement on a chemotherapy ward that lasts for a week. The patients are immunocompromised. Attendance for his placement is monitored and all sessions are mandatory. On the morning before his last day of placement, he vomits but attributes it to something that he ate the night before. He no longer feels unwell after being sick. Rank the following actions from most to least appropriate. A. Attend placement as usual. B. Wait until the beginning of the following week and then inform his hospital supervisor as to why he was not on placement. C. Call or email his hospital supervisor immediately and explain the situation. D. Ask a colleague going to the same placement that day to make the supervisor immediately aware of Andrew's absence.
Okay, so straight away the first thing that I would personally do is C, which is call or email the hospital supervisor immediately to explain the situation. I think patient safety is always the most important thing. You know, you do not know what bug you might be carrying, and as we said, they are immunocompromised, and it's not safe to come in that environment. And also transparency and respect for the supervisor that was taking time out of their day to, you know, kind of teach you and show you. So I think that's really important. So it would definitely be the first thing that I would do, because then as well, it also gives him a chance to maybe offer an alternative date that he could come in straight away and help with the organisation as well. So I think kind of the next appropriate thing to do would be to ask a colleague on the same placement that day to make the supervisor aware. I always think that you telling the supervisor directly yourself is going to be the best way to go about it, but kind of the next option would be communicating it via another person to ensure that it is on the day. And like I said, it means that kind of catch-up work can be done then, and there's transparency straight away between the student and the doctor. I think then the next thing that I would do is wait until the beginning of the following week to then inform. I really don't think this is an appropriate thing to do, because, you know, like we said, again, it's not respectful of the supervisor's time. And I think it also just shows a lack of kind of prioritization and time management. There's kind of no reason why you shouldn't be able to send that message at the earliest date, especially since the student themselves is no longer feeling very well. So there's kind of not really a valid reason why the transparency from the very beginning shouldn't be there. And then the thing that I would never do, so I would rank least appropriate, is attend placement as usual. Like we said, as a doctor, your main priority, and even as a medical student, your main priority is patient safety and patient care. And you are not aware of necessarily what illness you have, and passing it on to the immunocompromised chemotherapy patients is really the worst thing that you could do.
You are assigned to work on a group project with 3 other students in your course. One of them has not been contributing to the project and has missed several meetings. What would you do?
Okay, so I think the most important thing to do is to get in communication with that person that hasn't been attending, and to really get down to the bottom of the reason why they've not been attending. So I think depending on how that conversation goes, depends on what actions I would do. So maybe if there was a reason such as, there was maybe a bereavement, or there was a really personal issue that was going on that meant that they were not able to focus on their studies, then I'd really offer them my support. I'd say, that's okay, don't worry, we can help you catch up on the work later and really understand what sort of steps need to be in place when you feel ready to come back, so that you can carry on and kind of catch up on everything. I then also think I'd make sure that they have kind of key people to turn to, maybe check in on their friends to make sure that student's friends are aware of the situation and helping them, and maybe escalating it to kind of like the medical school supervisors if I really think that it's a serious issue and he's needing support with. I think maybe like another reason why they could not be involved in the project was maybe if they didn't really understand what their job within the project was. I'd maybe reach out for a message to them if they didn't quite understand, to help them, say if it's working on a PowerPoint presentation, if they're in charge of doing the PowerPoint, maybe just assisting them with how PowerPoint works, making sure that you can show them how to format it and the different themes that matches what we'd spoken about in the group together. So really just, go out of my way to help assist them if it's just a simple like clarification or just a little bit of extra support that they needed. Or maybe it could be alternatively, they're not quite happy with the position they have in the group. Maybe it's either it's too much time, it's taking up too much of their time and they don't have time for that, and then that's what's leading to the decline of the project. At that point, I think I would maybe kind of arrange a group meeting with the whole of the people on the project and see if we can, reassign roles, and we can work out what's the best roles that are suited to everyone, to maximize their individual skills, saying again about like somebody who has issues with PowerPoint, making sure that the person that's really good at IT has that sort of role. And then I think I'd hope that this wouldn't be the case, but maybe a final situation of they just weren't interested in the project and they weren't particularly interested in like engaging with the group. And I think that would be a real shame, and what I would just say to them is just to like reiterate how important the project is, how important it is to our medical education, and what we're going to learn from doing this project together. Teamwork skills and communication are something that's so important in medicine as a doctor. I think projects like these are really important in building these skills, and kind of say to them, this is a really good way to kind of like practice all of these skills so that when you get to a hospital, you're going to be really good at them. And then I think if at that point they still weren't engaging, that is then when I would probably escalate it to whoever was supervising and say, this person isn't wanting to be involved and isn't engaging in the project, and then seeing if they could find an extra person to join the project, or if the group then needs to come together to really work together to reassign the roles so that all of the jobs are done.
You are struggling with a difficult assignment in 2 weeks. You are also on the university rugby team. Your coach is close to kicking you off the team, and you have a match in 4 weeks' time. What would you do?
Okay, so I think the really important things here to do are deal with the short term and the long term. So the tactics of how you're going to deal with this situation in the next, 2 to 4 weeks, but also kind of like your strategy to make sure things like these don't happen again. So first of all, I think what I would do is acknowledge that academics has to take priority in this case. As a medical student, keeping on top of these academics is important to become the best doctor that you can, and maybe university rugby has to take that little bit step back in these kind of certain like stressful times. So what I would first of all do is look at my work, what that I'm struggling with, and identify the key areas that I'm going wrong. So is it that I fundamentally don't understand the topic. At that point, having spoken to my peers and seeing if I can help catch up on any of that work, I'd then probably go to a tutor and ask for that kind of one-on-one support and say, I've acknowledged that you've gotten yourself maybe in a little bit of a mess and that you need some help and you need some guidance just with this particular project in the short term. I think as well it's important to respect the university rugby and to kind of be transparent and open with them and say, I'm having a really difficult time at the moment with my academics and I have this essay that's due in 2 weeks, which I'm struggling with. That needs to be my priority at the moment. Say, I know we have this really important match in 4 weeks, but I think I can then give my full attention in those in those 2 weeks, those 2 weeks before the match. And you're still really keen to be involved. But I think the fundamental kind of issue with this is task prioritization and time management. So I think for me, this would kind of like set my alarm bells ringing to know that I really need to work on my time management. So from then on, I think my strategy would be to have a much more strict timetable of my work and kind of see what are the big events that I have coming up in the future, whether that be a presentation, whether that be a certain match or something like that, to see where these key points are and I can delegate my time appropriately, time in advance before it gets all too overwhelming. I think it's as well just recognizing and kind of acknowledging your own academic limits and making sure you know when to reach out for support and help. So say if I am particularly struggling with one lecture, again, like I said before, making sure I talk to my friends at the time, when you're walking out of the lecture theatre and it's something that I've just not understood, talking with them on the way, I'll be like, oh, I just didn't quite understand that point that they were going on about. And then at that point, it stops it snowballing. So overall, I think in this situation, it's unfortunate and academics are going to have to take priority. You're going to have to speak to the university rugby staff. But I think the main thing is just taking the time for time and organisational management, because it's going to be something that's so important as a medical student, but also as a doctor for in the future.
You are at a lab session and your partner texts you to sign them in on their behalf. They find practicals boring and not useful. What do you do?
Okay, so the first thing that I would do is tell my lab partner that I'm not able to do that. That is something that goes against the medical school rules, and I don't think that is maintaining the professional integrity and just kind of like the being professional as a medical student that we're going to need as when we're doctors. So I would be completely against doing that. And I think what I'd first do is kind of understand, is it really because you find it boring, and kind of emphasize to them why they should come. Because first of all, as a lab kind of activity, it's not something that you're going to be able to catch up on. We can't just start a new lab for you because it's most convenient to you at that time. I think it's important because it's obviously mandatory for a reason in terms of skills. It's something that's going to be important for our medical education. Say maybe like it's like a lab where we're learning about certain anatomy, and obviously if you've never seen that anatomy, when you come to dealing with a patient, it's going to be really hard and really difficult to know what to do, and you're not going to be as confident, and then again it's going to put patient safety at risk. So, ensuring to them like it's mandatory for a reason and you really should come. And so I'd try and get that across to them. And then maybe if they said it was for, actually it's not that they find it boring and they do acknowledge that they are there and they're important for a reason, I'd then offer them the support and say, maybe you should talk to the medical school about this. If you talk to the lab supervisor about something that's going on, and see if there are alternative measures that can be put in place, and kind of, give them as a friend, like a helping hand, or like offering your support to them. But I also think as well, like it's really important in these scenarios is to focus on your own medical education. If this person is your lab partner and this is the sort of thing where it requires 2 people in a lab, by them not attending, it's also maybe jeopardizing part of your medical education. And if you think this is going to be something that's a repeating pattern, maybe again contacting a supervisor or somebody that's running the lab to say, can I find a new lab partner? Is there a way that I can join in with another group? Because I'm not sure that my partner and I are going to have the most kind of like effective routine, and I'm really keen and I really want to learn. So I want to do the best about that. So I think first of all, making sure that I would never agree to the text and sign them in, because that goes against all of the rules. Offering my support if needed, but also reminding them of the educational importance and also protecting my own education.
Compare and contrast practicing as a doctor in a rural area versus in a city. What are some of the challenges that each doctor may face?
Okay, so to me, a rural doctor is someone that's probably working in remote locations where there's kind of wide catchment areas and they're not necessarily close to each other and close to the GP practices. So I think as a doctor, there's going to be kind of quite niche problems that you're going to encounter. I think the main one is accessibility. And I think this can work both ways, with accessibility limits to the doctor themselves, but also to the patients. For the patients, there's probably not really good public transport links. That means it's going to be easy for them to access the doctor's care. So in that case, doctors may have to kind of be more adaptable and to go and visit the patients in the remote locations, say if they're elderly and they can't drive or they don't necessarily have family that's close to them. I think there it's going to be difficult to maintain the highest standard of care of patients that we possibly can, because transportation of, certain medical devices and, area like sterile areas and things like that, if we need to conduct, say, certain examinations and things like that, it might not be possible. So I think the big challenge is kind of dealing with the resources and becoming adaptable. And I think it's quite a different population that they're taking care of in these rural areas. I think particularly an issue that they might encounter with, like, say, the elderly people is the ideas of isolation and loneliness, and we know these can really cause a decline in health. I think as well that's really important is patient education in these rural areas. I think for these people, because they can be isolated, it's really important that the doctors help them become educated and aware of key symptoms and signs that they need to look out for. That means that they might need to kind of progress to a hospital setting straight away, rather than waiting for the accessibility to come to the rural practices. I think this is a big contrast to kind of what city doctors would have to deal with. Kind of being in a city is a completely different environment to rural, and things such as air pollution, which we know is a big risk factor in certain diseases. So I think it's going to be kind of like a different dynamic in a population of the more common illnesses that they see. We know that this can exacerbate things such as asthma. So they might need to be able to deal with that more effectively. I think as well, kind of with being in the city, is kind of like the trauma of the car accidents and, things like that, such as cyclists that are getting into cycling accidents and things like that. So being able to deal with like these emergencies and these traumas quickly and effectively, and making sure that they again can access the healthcare as best as they can in these inner city populations. I think as well, something that kind of is in stark contrast to the rural is probably the overwhelming amount of patients that kind of a city hospital and a doctor may have to deal with. And again, that's all about, dealing with your stress and time management under these kind of critical conditions while still maintaining the highest care possible. So I think overall, both rural and city doctors have very kind of unique challenges that they are going to face in terms of probably accessibility versus kind of like overwhelming. So yeah.
Being a junior doctor can be busy and tiring, often involving working nights and weekends and having a fixed rota that can make planning family time more difficult. How will you manage?
Okay, so I think kind of what's really important is that, as junior doctors, we know and we acknowledge that it's going to be incredibly busy, that we have to give as much as we can to our patients, and that can involve long and grueling shifts, necessarily, working weekends, which isn't typical to kind of like the 9 to 5 working week that works with everyone else. So I think first of all, in the short term, it's about being transparent with like your family and friends and saying, I'm really sorry, I can't come to this birthday party that you've invited me to. I've tried to rearrange my shift, but there's nothing I can do about it. And I think, it is possible that you are able to kind of communicate with like your shift manager to switch a rota at the last minute, if so needed, but kind of acknowledge that this cannot always happen and that these kind of conversations need to happen. And I think that also kind of works with the long term, kind of making sure that you're transparent from the very beginning that, you love medicine and there's so many things that go into medicine that it's why you want to do it. It's why you want to be a junior doctor, because you love having those patient interactions. You like having like quite an intense job, but kind of getting the high reward from it and kind of like the continual development. And with that development comes a lot of time. I think it's kind of talking about those sorts of things to your friends, your family, your relationships, to ensure that, your job has to take priority over these sorts of things. But I also think it's really important to look after yourself as well and acknowledge that these are stressful and difficult times, and kind of having mechanisms to kind of cope with these stresses of, say, maybe, you're stressed, you're annoyed, you wanted to go to that friend's birthday party and you can't go to it, and you're just coming off night shifts and things like that, and having a way to de-stress and to kind of release all of that energy. And I think for me, that would probably be sports. I'd really enjoy playing sports. I think it's a really good way to let off steam and kind of detach yourself away from quite an intense environment. I also think a new thing that I've started that I think would be really important in this kind of scenarios, things like meditating and mindfulness. Meditating and mindfulness can happen irrelevant of location, irrelevant of kind of time of day, and that can always be a coping mechanism that you can have in place to kind of de-stress from these environments and when you're feeling like you're maybe missing out on something. So overall, I think, it's all about managing the short term, the expectations, and kind of trying to be as involved as you can, but also long-term planning of coping mechanisms, but also making sure you book your annual leave when you know that there are these important events. So again, I think it's just about time management and kind of your organizational skills from the very beginning.